I'll just kind of get started, and would really like to just thanks everyone for being here on a snowy Sunday and just being willing to accept this rather unorthodox invitation from your relative, and kind of I know it's been a few years of kind of knowing that I'm doing something like this, and I've been looking into these things, and so really I'm excited for the opportunity to share with everybody um, what I've been collecting over the last uh, 4 something years. And it's actually quite a sense of relief too, because it's all been living up here. And so I'm really excited to offload it all onto you all, so that you so that is not solely my responsibility to have be the steward of. So I do just want a couple housekeeping items is um, that I'm recording this first session, obviously not gonna distribute it at all publicly, but to people who are planning to attend but and want to attend the second meeting, or have a sense of what we discussed this morning, just recording it for them so they can catch up, and as we kind of pinpoint a good time for us to meet, over the next couple of months, if that's kind of what we decide to do, then that's a good starting point. So I think I'll probably the best thing to do is for me to kind of overview this project. So I put together a little bit of a presentation for everyone this morning, kind of discuss how this project came about, where it stands. Don't be shy about asking any questions. I'll open it up at the end too, to just have general questions and discussion. What I don't want to do is set a precedent where I'm just talking at you. I think it's, the whole point is to share this all with you, but then, kind of understand your all's opinions on it, and how you're consuming it as well. So don't want to set that precedent, but do think it's important to kind of give you a good overview first, for a basis for us to discuss. A little nervous, but here it goes. So just want to start with just to give everyone a general timeline of where the things stood for a long time. Obviously, we're discussing what's very sad, the very sad and tragic end of Terry Zilligan's life in 1964. But of course, also wanting to honor him as a person too, and understand him as a man. We'll get into that a little bit. So I don't want that to kind of dominate this entire conversation, but it is obviously a big piece here. So March 14th, 1964, at the Golf Mill Sears in Niles, Illinois, is where that tragedy happened. And Terry was 26 years old, which is actually the age I started looking into all this. So that was a little weird for me to start this at 26 and be like, oh, what would it be like to, not have any more life after this time? It's really, that was powerful for me. And then another kind of, these are really just kind of flashpoints in the 20th century. There's this 1968. There was a federal trial that took place in the fall of that year, in which the federal government brought charges against some major outfit leaders or mob leaders who served under Sam Giancana, which is a name that you'll want to remember as well during this process in this project. But Terry's name and the murder itself was invoked at that trial many times. And so, as I went along with my research, his name was referenced many times during the coverage of this trial. I'm not entirely sure if the family kept up with that trial, but it was a very public trial. Judge Julius Hoffman presided over it, a very, infamous judge. And so we kind of covering that as well as kind of a big piece of it. Then really from 1964 to 1983, the family was, I think, pretty much accepting of the fact that the Niles police's culprit and kind of top suspect was the perpetrator of the murder. Until 1983, the family was introduced to new information. There was an article that surfaced that year written by Sun-Times columnist Art Patak and his partner Hugh Ho, and we'll discuss that a little bit. But following that article being released about the cover-up of Terry's murder, or I should say, alleged cover-up of Terry's murder. I'm trying to be objective as I kind of go along, but the family then had a meeting with a member of the Sears security department. He's the director of Midwest Security. He was actually at Gulf Mill Sears on March 14th, 1964, and then sort of personally was wanted to see the crime solved and did a lot on his own personal time. His name was John Shields. And then I believe there was also a family meeting in 1997 where everybody got together, kind of shared thoughts about Terry and the tragedy and whatnot. And then kind of from there, I think, it's been dormant, this topic. I think, like if anybody wants to share anything about the 1997 meeting, obviously I was only 4 years old. I don't remember it. Would love to kind of open it up if there's anybody who remembers that, or if there's any key takeaways from that before I keep going, so I don't just blab at you guys. That's fine if not.
Well, I think that at that meeting was the first general realization that there wasn't a common base of remembrance or meaning, that people were bringing different pieces, and it was kind of shocking because we had all believed, everybody sort of believed this, knew the same thing, and we realized that people were holding various pieces of information or memories, and so it was a not just shocking, it was really powerful. Like your dad, Peggy, talked about actually being the only one who went in to see Terry's body as a dead body and what it looked like. And no one knew that before. And that was a big moment, and for him too, to share it.
Yeah, I agree. It was, I don't remember that much. I was younger too, and Terry was always this kind of almost mythical person to me because I never got to meet him. But it was such a, I'm trying to find the words, turning point for the family. I don't think they were ever the same.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. There were like a lot of notes from that meeting too that I've been able to kind of read over that I think Marilyn took, and so I think good for the family to, I think, maybe finally have some answers, but maybe there's, I think, some acceptance that there was not always going to be a set answer, which really is kind of a common theme to my research too, is like what kind of little crumbs and pieces can we pick up that can tell us some things and give us some closure, and so that's kind of how all this really began too, was really the Legends of Lally project that I put together in I think I finished it in 2018. That's a documentary about Mary and Tom's life, but the beginning kind of was could not ignore the part of history in which Terry was present in Mary's life, and kind of how that sort of started things. And I think too, it's like all these kind of just going back to the timeline, there's just all these different flashpoints of things that happened, but never, as I was growing up, and as Margaret said, like Terry was really kind of like a mythical figure, and so kind of interesting that that's sort of part of mourning him, was kind of turning him into this kind of myth, and being like, wow, he did this amazingly brave thing. And I don't think he ever would have thought that that's how things would have turned out. But as we come upon 2024, it'll be the 60th anniversary of his death on March 14th. And so I think be another great reason for us to be here is to kind of honor that anniversary with a bit clearer of an understanding of the circumstances surrounding it. And so that's just kind of what I'm trying to achieve here. So by sharing this. So just getting back into kind of the origins of the research. The Legends of Lally documentary. I got a little bit not cocky, but I thought, okay, I can research literally any newspaper article ever. And so, if there's answers my mom wants about Terry Zilligan, then I'll just go find that really quickly. And so Labor Day weekend 2019, I was like, didn't have any plans, 3-day weekend. Okay, I'll just go on, my DePaul research, portal, and just, start plugging in names. And what I was really looking for was this Sun-Times article by Art Patak that I'll share with everybody. The thing, though, the roadblock I ran into, though, is that the Sun-Times does not have electronic records of any of their newspapers before 2000. And so I was like, oh, I'll just find this really quickly. And then no, I have to go to the Harold Washington Library downtown and actually go through the microfilms if I want to find that. And my dad was actually the person who told me about the article, because he is the one who was just reading the Sun-Times one Sunday morning in 1983, sitting across from my mom, and was reading, the crime articles that Art Patak would put out every Sunday. And he looked across the table to my mom and said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm reading a story about your dad's murder. And that was in 1983. So obviously very, very shocking. And so I really wanted to read that article. And finally, so he said, that was sometime in the early 80s. Okay, great. So I had to start from January 1980, and every Sunday find the microfilm article, read the article. Okay, that's not it. So I made it until I think 1982. And then I asked the librarian for help, which, kids, you should always ask a librarian first. And the librarian was really interested in kind of finding this with me. And I went home on one of those days, and I had an email a couple days later. Is this the article you're looking for? And she sent it to me, and my heart just sank. So finding that was a big, big deal. And I want to give that history, because I'll send that out to you all after this meeting. It was also the first time that I started to research the names Paul Painsco and Michael LaJoy, which are two, I think that the two potential culprits of this crime. And I think the family's gone back and forth over those two names for quite some time. And certainly the police and investigators have their view on who did it exactly. And then there's also this other side of the coin in which, there's a lot of evidence the other way. And I won't bias anybody early, but that's kind of the whole basis of this. And then that weekend was also the first time that I heard the name Richard Kane, and that was because of that 1968 trial in which he was one of the defendants And he was the one who was actually invoking the Gulf Mill Sears murder as a way to man, Jim, I probably need you on this, but to discredit the witnesses, impeach the witnesses, who were Michael LaJoy, Joseph DiArgento, and Patrick Shank. So I don't want to get too lost in that, but and we'll get back to that sort of at the end. But Richard Kane is just an incredibly interesting figure that really is at the foundation of a lot of this. And there he is to the right there. He's kind of this wannabe spy character that certainly gives this kind of a whole other level of fascination too that I never knew about. And so one thing I, did was kind of one of the times that really like kind of made me fall out of my chair during this research. One of many times was, I was researching Richard Kane and found out he was assassinated in a sandwich shop on the West Side in 1973. And so I looked up where that was. It's on 1117 Grand Avenue. And so this is just kind of like a screenshot of what I would have looked at there. So, okay, I'm searching that up. And obviously the number 117 also has a lot of spiritual and sentimental value in the family. So I thought that address was interesting. So then kind of recreating this moment I had where I'm looking up the address of this and then seeing what the business is today. And it's actually this, which I thought was really like threw me off and made my heart sank that this is actually where Richard Kane was assassinated in 1973. And this is the business that's there today. Terry's Toffee, Taste a Little Piece of Heaven. It was just one of those moments where I'm doing research and I'm kind of like, oh, this is maybe, whatever this just feels different, feels bigger, feels more monumental that, I mean, look at it. There's not really any words to say there. So that was a big one. I feel like I'm talking too much. So if anybody else wants to jump in, feel free to cut me off, or else I'll keep going.
You're good, Tom.
Okay. Okay.
But that is striking. I think everybody had a little moment.
Yeah, that's a wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
And they have good toffee too, might I say. It's very delicious. And they're in Lincoln Park now, which is funny because this is still the Google image. They have not been at that location since like 2018. And the Google image is still this today. Like I took this screen cap the other day. So just kind of lingering there. Now it's some like bougie little shop. But Terry's Toffee is in Lincoln Park and it's really good. I got some good Christmas gift there a couple years ago. All right. So, so anyway, just one of many moments in which, kind of felt like this was bigger than me and that I was merely kind of like a steward of this project. And so that was important for my motivation as well. As has been kind of, this is just a photo of kind of currently what my brain looks like, but also one like an initial sketch of kind of all the different inner workings and kind of web, I should call it, of the different people and different facets and the timeline. There's quite a bit. So I saw that in my journal, so I thought I'd share this with you guys. That's an early sketch. A lot of bad information on there, I should also say, that I've cleared up. But yeah, currently what my brain looks like, and hopefully what yours will too soon after this meeting. But like I said, another kind of important motivator for me in this project was getting to know Terry himself for the first time and kind of discussing how, as a young kid, just thinking of him in this sort of legend mythical status, as you said, Margaret, and being like, okay, what is that all about? Like, who actually is he? I used to pray to him like before my baseball games because I was a pitcher too. But other than that, just, important for me to understand him and know him as a man, being my grandfather and having, his blood in me, and talking with Mom quite a bit about, kind of the man he was, and saw a lot of parallels in myself. And then then between Mom and Missy and Terry, you all had copies of letters that he wrote home between 1956 and 1960 when he was in the Air Force and serving in England. And so that was a really nice moment. Right before COVID, I got those letters. And so I don't know if anyone's ever read them before, but these are some of the sketches from some of them that he included that I just find amazing. He's just very zany yet serious, which is very, very much my personality as well. He's a great writer. He is in tune with nature. So just all these different things that I kind of related to, and so I began kind of reading those letters and transcribing them too. So I have digital copies of them as well. And yes, I clipped the pictures though in the digital transcriptions because you can't just have the text. How are you going to leave these things out? Yeah,
that was a real blessing. I think for me, and I think for all of us, and I'd never heard of those letters before, or at least maybe in passing, but to actually get to sit down and read through a bunch of intimate letters and with insights into the personality of Terrence John, who again, totally agree, has just been this legend and larger than life character, was awesome. That was such a privilege and blessing to be able to do that. So that was, even on top of all the other cool stuff, that amazing stuff that you're doing, that was worth it. I think for a lot of people, for me, just to be able to get that, because I'm not sure that I would have read those, and my siblings and stuff too, had you not been doing this.
I appreciate that, TG. Yeah, it was it's nice to have them, and I'll make them available to everyone else too. They're Google Docs now, so I'll send them along too, just at some point.
And just so you know, Terry and Missy and I each have a full set, and I gave you my set, Tom, right?
Yeah, that's right. They're mine now. Sorry.
They are.
Yeah. I'm just kidding. But yeah, just really, so that's something that I kind of I really want to keep central to the research. Is really not just focusing on the death of Terry, which I think is easy to kind of redirect. Your mind redirects to that right away, but just remembering this life that he had. And he was not some simple fella either, super complex, very serious, had this great zeal for life. And it's important to recognize that that was put to an end, and it's just one of the biggest tragedies you could ever imagine. And so really, really has been important for me in this research to always come back to Terry, because I fall down these rabbit holes with the investigation and the trial and all that. But if I don't come back to kind of who am I doing this for, and then that's just been very motivating. Just a fascinating guy, and I really see him in all of us, including you, Terrence John Lally. And so let me just continue to I think I just kind of want to overview a little bit more about the project, and there's a few pieces to it, and I know many of you are aware of this, but the first kind of major piece is the manuscript itself, which I'm finishing up now, and not to make it daunting or anything, but I'm on chapter 85, so it's a lot of information. And so the purpose of it is and what it lays out objectively, or at least when I try to be as objective and as possible and neutral as possible, is who's the perpetrator? Was it Paul Peanuts Painsco, one of the most infamous burglars in the 50s and 60s nationwide? Or was it Michael LaJoy, kind of a nobody, nephew of an outfit underboss with gambling debts, and certainly a known holdup man in the Chicago area at the same time. Who was it? The manuscript also takes a first person perspective, and this is kind of the wild part about it all, is there's a layer of the research that involves the Chicago outfit, which many of you are aware is really the name for the Chicago mob, the Italian mob, the outfit. And there are two key people that I'm actually related to, thank God, not by blood. And I want to say that over and over again, not by blood. I don't have a sociopath in me, I think. But it's Willie Potatoes Dodano is a cousin of my dad's through marriage. And then also Sam Mooney Giancana, or Momo Giancana, is also a cousin of my dad's through marriage. And so on my father's side, these two characters who play kind of an indirect role and played an indirect role in the crime itself, and kind of the key players, are on my dad's side. And then on my mom's side is actually the victim. And then also Ed Hanrahan, who is a former Cook County State's attorney. I'll get into him a little bit in a minute, who's the second cousin of Mary Zilligan. So just kind of weird to be on both sides of the coin with my parents as well. And so I have some reflections about that and how that's just an interesting position to be in, to say the least. So and as bad of a man as he was, I think probably one of the better mob nicknames I've ever heard is Willie Potatoes. And that's literally just because he liked potatoes. There's nothing crazy about it. So there's the manuscript, which we'll kind of hopefully read as a group. And then there's a part of the process as well was making this into a podcast, and all I have is a pilot episode, which is about an hour long. It took me about 4 or 5 months last summer to put together. The goal of this is to kind of pitch it to production companies and find a production partner for this, since it's really difficult to be recording this in my pantry for months at a time, especially when my upstairs neighbors are banging around up there. But also another goal is to just kind of continue to release some more episodes in 2024. But I've been really focused on finishing up the manuscript, and now this project, which I'm really excited about, our book club. So there's that. And then, there's the pantry studio. This is also sharing this on my Facebook group that many of you, I think, are a part of. Just has given me an opportunity to share this and not go through all this alone. And not necessarily like I've been going through it alone. I've been sharing it with my mom, obviously, and my immediate family. But I just feel like there's so much worth to it that I've used this platform to post some even articles about current crimes and things that are going on that have parallels to the research, and hear people's opinions on it and kind of incorporate that into my perspective of things.
Tom, is your pantry always that organized?
It is not.
No.
No.
Can I just say something? I have to go. I'm so sorry, but
Hi, baby.
I just want to say that I'm a huge true crime listener to podcasts, and when I listened to this, I was like, "Yep, this is it. It's really good." So I highly recommend that everybody listen, and you'll be wanting a second episode. So hopefully we see that in the future. It's really good. Really good.
Thanks, Kai. On your break at work?
Yes, and I gotta go. So awesome. Awesome job.
Thanks,
Bye,
Bye, guys.
See you.
Bye. Love you.
Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Yeah, you could even see a picture of Terry there next to the maple syrup and crushed tomatoes there. So just kept it up for motivation. But anyway, so that's one aspect. Just included different sources on there that I've used. And then also I think the part I really want to zero in on is the interviews that I've done for this project. I've done, these are 5 key interviews that I've done to gain information and perspective about these certain inflection points and all this different information. Michael Caine is the author of The Tangled Web, which I should have a picture of on this slide. I'm sure he'd like for me to be driving book sales for him too. He's a friend of mine now. He was, I read his book about his half brother, Richard Caine, in 2020. And I contacted him through his publisher and just wanted to have a conversation with him. The book does make a lot of reference to the 1968 trial. I believe also has like Michael LaJoie's name in there as well. So reached out to him and gave him kind of an overview of the research I was doing. And his first reaction was, oh, well, it doesn't add up really, because state charge, murder is a state charge, and Michael LaJoie got, federal witness protection. So it just doesn't really add up. Sorry, man, but, great work. And then I got a call from him like a month later, and clearly he had done some thinking of it. And he's like, no, you know what? I'm sorry. I was totally wrong. I think you got something here, because there's just all these people who were double dealing in this time. A lot of men sort of used, a lot of ambitious men really used Terry's death and the investigation to kind of propel their own careers, which is a theme of this project as well, and certainly a tragic theme at that. I ended up going down to Roswell, Georgia to visit Michael Caine when I was down there in Atlanta for a conference, and spent a couple nights at his house. And luckily he's a Guinness drinker and an Irish whiskey drinker. So pulled a couple all-nighters with his stash, and got to visit with him, which was a real joy, and a great friendship developed. But what is kind of the strange thing is that his half brother is Richard Caine, who is, you'll just have to kind of see. I can't describe it. It won't do it justice for me to start describing Richard Caine to you all. I'll just let that be. Another interview I did was with former Cook County Sergeant John Flood, who now lives in San Diego, but I found him on Facebook in an outfit Facebook post group, and connected with him. And, after a lot of Facebook messaging, we did some Zoom interviews, which I recorded, and he's a firsthand witness to something I'll bring up in my findings section of this presentation, but he's been a great friend and resource too. And then Dick English worked in the Cook County Jail. He was the former jail superintendent in charge of breaking up what they called the barn boss system, which was a jail hierarchy in which murderers were basically in charge and de facto leaders of each unit of the jail. And a couple of those barn bosses came forward and tried to give testimony against Michael LaJoie and Joseph DiArgento, saying that they admitted to the murder of Terry Zilligan while they were in prison to gain protection as a barn boss, since you can only be a barn boss if you've murdered before. It's the toughest of criminals. So I talked with Dick English on the phone about that, who knew some of these guys. I know I'm throwing a lot of information, and certainly don't need for you to remember every single bit, but just giving you an overview here. Also talked with Skip Fucarino at the Niles Police Department, who basically, in kinder terms, told me to go fuck off. Because he was the senior most member of the Niles Police Department, and when I put a FOIA request in to the police department to get their file, an investigatory file, he gave me a personal phone call and was like, what are you doing? And this case is pretty much solved. And it was peanuts, Paintsco. And if you think anything else, you're crazy. So that was a fun conversation, to say the least. And I'm sure I'll have another conversation with Skip again, since that was a couple of years ago, and I've got more to show him. So I'm looking forward to that. And then Tom Ferraro is the president of the Niles Historical Society, and he's actually writing a book about Niles history, and will be including a piece about the Gulf Mill Sears murder, and did an extensive interview with the lead detective in Niles, Ed Dennis, about the crime. So I'm still trying to get his notes of that interview. So that's ongoing. So blah, 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 blah. Let's get into the findings. These are top line findings and of what I've been able to get out of all this different research. Some of it may not be new to you all, but I can tell you these are really kind of top line. Their top line findings. There's a lot that's underneath them, and there's a lot of context here. So first and foremost, just kind of a small piece, but found out that during the time there were several Brinks related robberies in early 1964, and they traced the intel of those robberies and kind of the inside information to a mechanic for Brinks, who was for whatever reason supplying intel to local robbery gangs about the truck routes, etc. And so that was one interesting piece of information I found. Paul Peanuts Painsko and the Painsko robbery gang is actually a group of three brothers, and he's the youngest of those three brothers, was and still is Niles Police's top suspect for the murder. Even though doing a lot of research on Paul Painsko, he was known not to use loaded weapons on, what he would call jobs or burglaries and robberies. And the reason for that is he was a very slippery guy. The police could not pin him down. And part of that was he could never be charged with armed robbery because he did not carry a weapon that had actual bullets in it. So a little bit, I'm sure laws have changed since then, but they just could never pin him down. And so there was sort of a widespread frustration about this guy, Paul Peanuts Painsko, and the inability of law enforcement and the judicial system to actually put him in jail. And he was known to tell cops, and this is from a book about him and his brothers, that if you ever catch me, don't shoot, I'm never armed. But so you can see how it might be sort of a leap to say that he was the person that shot Terry in a crowded mall with dozens of bystanders around. That's just one piece that just doesn't necessarily add up, but maybe it does to you. So trying to be objective. This is a big one here as the first bullet point, and this comes directly from my interview with John Flood, who was there at the time and swears by this. But the Niles police detectives who were involved in investigating and trying to find the culprit for Terry Zilligan's murder did plan to assassinate Paul Painsko in the street and claim that he was Terry's assassin without giving him due process. Now, that's a big finding, obviously, that I'm keeping close to the chest, because I'm not going to go out and put that out there and get sued by Niles police and everything. But this is something that John Flood, who's a career detective and really, really credible person, credible professional, says is what happened. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go along, but it's one of those findings that really kind of has made my skin crawl. And I do at the same time understand almost their desperation. It certainly is against kind of our whole system of due process. That said, John Flood actually himself intervened in this plot and arrested Painsko himself, and then the murder warrant that was issued for Painsko actually, developed into a state grand jury, not finding enough evidence to bring charges against him, to indict him. And then from there, I think the Niles police were so defeated that did not happen, that they refused to review any new evidence, including anything against Michael LaJoy from 1968 and after. And there's evidence for that refusal as well. And like I said, I mentioned the FOIA that I did on their investigation full file, and you'd imagine that would be, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, being a crime this big. And at the time, this crime was, just massive, had so much publicity, and was really unprecedented. The actual FOIA file that I received was only about 15 pages, and it was all about Peanuts Paintsco and getting him and evidence against him. There was nothing about Michael LaJoy or anything. So it was clearly condensed, or it was clearly not, pretty biased perspective. So there's that. And then there's
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
did you ever get the feeling that the Niles Police Department was also corrupt, or is this, you think,
good question.
just a cover up of their own issues?
Yeah, good question. I don't get the sense that they were interested at all in covering up the murder. I think totally they were dead set on finding somebody to pin this on, because there was so much public pressure. And just for months afterwards, it never ceased. I never got the sense that they were interested in protecting anybody, but I did get the sense that they were willing to go to great lengths to pin this on Paintsco. And that wasn't just their decision. Paintsco was, connected. He brought in a lot of revenue for the outfit. And so there had to have been kind of a blessing from the top to be going after him in that way. And that would have come from Detective Bill Hanhart, if you've ever heard that name. But this is coming from my discussions with John Flood, and that Bill Hanhart, who ended up himself being a dirty cop, was in charge of the investigations of anybody related to organized crime. And he would have given the blessing to say, yeah, go out and get Paintsco. And so there is kind of maybe at the very top, and those kind of giving the blessing to Niles Police to pursue that, some shady dealings. But I feel like the Niles Police detectives really were not dirty by any real sense of the term. It was a pretty docile suburb to begin with. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. Just because you mentioned in the podcast about the outfit having so many bad cops throughout the suburbs, I didn't know if Niles was one of them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm sure there were some things they overlooked, and I'm sure, it was just kind of a bizarre environment for law enforcement at the time. But it really seemed like they were totally caught off guard by this and didn't know what to do, and just wanted the case closed. It was unprecedented, and not a welcome thing for them in their town to have to deal with all this all of a sudden. But another thing too that's regarding Niles Police is that there was, and in that podcast is that, that somebody did call in on March 14th, 1964 to Niles Police and left a convincing enough message to them to have them go and pick up Michael LaJoy, arrest him at his home, and bring him in for questioning. Eventually he was sent home and was not considered to be a suspect after that. However, when you look at kind of the months and years, both preceding and following the crime, he was committing armed holdups anywhere from a bank to a church rectory to people's personal homes. And so this is somebody who is an absolute vicious sociopath who, like I said, is also the nephew of outfit underboss Willie Potatoes Dodano. I want to also be clear that I am not related to Michael LaJoy, but there is a way to kind of tie my dad through marriage to Willie Potatoes and then to Michael LaJoy himself. And so it's a small world in Chicago, especially when you're Italian or Irish. That's something that is an interesting tie as well, and also something to consider when you think about who would have gotten special protections. Would be family members of outfit brass and family members of outfit lieutenants like Willie Potatoes, who pretty much ran the what they call the juice racket or juice loan racket in the western suburbs under Sam Giancana. And so, yeah, just we discussed a little bit about the evidence that came forward from the jailhouse about Michael LaJoy and when he was sent to jail for a bank robbery that he committed in 1963. He tried to gain protection in the jail, from, beatings and, all the other horrible stuff by being a barn boss. And the only way you can be a barn boss is if you were a murderer. And so he told the current regime of barn bosses about the murders that he committed, and one of them was Terry Zilligan's murder, and admitting to that among others as well. So
with details, with credible substantive detail.
Correct, yeah, not just saying, oh, this
Right.
did that one. So there's two tapes, only one of which I have, that are interviews of two of the barn bosses who came forward. One is Martin Tajra and one is Samuel Felici. And Martin Tajra's tape is the tape I have. And, if you listen to the whole thing, you can feel like he's pretty credible. There's a snippet of it at the beginning of the podcast that's actually recreated by my cousin. I don't know if he's here, but Pat Blaha did a great job with that. Essentially, there's just a real sense of credibility there because of all of the details that LaJoy shared about the crime itself that Tajra and Felici wouldn't have been privy to, and they wouldn't have been able to make up just on their own. So again, kind of just with what we have today, just trying to make assumptions and kind of draw those lines together on things that, are kind of old evidence and old pieces, but it's the best we can do in 2023. And then just getting back to Ed Hanrahan, but Ed Hanrahan again, his wife Geraldine was Mary's second cousin. I think they used to get together for lunch even frequently, but he was a political animal under and I use that not to call him an animal, but political animal, very politically savvy person and politically minded person under the Daily Machine, and a man of great stature under Richard J. Daley's tenure. He was the lead architect of the immunity deal for Michael LaJoy, Joseph DiArgento, and Patrick Shang. Now, one of the craziest things about the immunity deal is these three people, who are also believed to have done the Sears Roebuck job as well, committed a bank robbery in September 1963. They were caught shortly thereafter and arrested. And so they believe that one of them ratted on each other. And so in order to find the rat between the three of them and a couple others who did the job too, Willie Potatoes, who was in charge of this motley crew, set up a lie detector test between all of them. And they were each to come and take a lie detector test about whether they gave information to the government. That ended up in their arrests. The person that put together the lie detector tests and had the actual lie box machine was Richard Kane. And he was currently working for the Cook County Sheriff's Office at the time. And then as a side gig was doing lie detector tests for people all the way from Hugh Hefner to these outfit bosses and these outfit people. So even though they committed the bank robbery, the government asked them to testify against those who helped them cover it up and who helped them, who administered the lie detector test to them. That would have been Willie Potatoes, Richard Kane, and others. We'll get into those information. So it's kind of weird how you can commit a crime and then be the witness against those who helped you cover it up and get away scot-free. It's a very, very strange way to do justice in our country, but that's what happened in 68. And Ed Hanrahan led the charge in that. There's no doubt about that. And then an FBI agent who was on the witness stand during the trial said that these three received the most generous witness protection deal anyone had ever gotten to that point. And the reason for all of that is because this was during an election year in 1968, which was a red wave year. It was the year of law and order in which Richard Nixon became president. It also was the year in which Richard Ogilvie became governor of Illinois. And so we'll get into that too, but there were political motivations as well. I mentioned Hanrahan being a political animal. He was running for Cook County State's attorney that year, brought the charges against these outfit men. I know there's a lot of moving parts there, but hopefully that gives you some idea of how backwards and upside down all this was. And in the middle of it all is Terry Zilligan, whose name is being invoked. And, there was a lot of findings about the actual crime during those proceedings that were reported on. And then also found letters to J. Edgar Hoover, who was being kept personally apprised of the condition of Michael LaJoy and Joseph D'Argento and Patrick Shang and how they were holding up on the witness stand. He had personal interest in this as well. So just a lot of big names. And so I pretty much just described this here, but the pictures on the right there is Sam Giancana at the top, which would have been my grandma Josephine's stepbrother on my dad's side. Mooney Giancana. I think he's got this, like, he used to hang out with like Frank Sinatra and like Marilyn Monroe and those people. He's in the movie The Irishman too, if you've ever seen it. And not to get too into his celebrity because that kind of grosses me out, but his underboss is there is Willie Potatoes on the lower left, and then that's Richard Kane in the lower right hand corner, looking shady as ever. These three were definitely, there's a lot of ties between them. The two on the bottom were defendants in that 1968 case. So Dodano on the left ordered the lie detector tests. Richard Kane on the right administered the lie detector tests. And later they went to federal prison for doing that on the basis of the testimony of those who actually committed the crime itself. That's a lot. I really thought I was going to keep that to 20 minutes. It was not 20 minutes. My bad. Let me open it up to everyone. Questions, discussions, and mostly me shutting up. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, Tom, thank you for doing all this research. It's absolutely fascinating. I have to run right now, but I was listening and am continuing to hold on to every word that you present us with. So thank you. It's been a delight to hear this information, and it's absolutely fascinating. I love you guys. I gotta go.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, T. Love
See you
you.
Wednesday.
Can I try to just see if I'm following this correctly? Like broad strokes. So LaJoy and the two others, I can't remember their names, got a plea deal in 1968 where they just essentially got off scot-free because the prosecutors actually wanted to go after the higher-ups who tried to cover up the crime.
Nailed it.
Is that what you're saying? So that's it. So they didn't care about the actual crime. They only cared about the cover-up.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it
Yes.
doesn't make sense, but I get it. Yeah.
Right. Right. And it was an election year, and that trial was conveniently scheduled through September of 68, and then the first week of October, and it had Hanrahan's. Hanrahan was the one that actually brought the indictment, and so he was getting good press. He was able
Right.
to
He
talk
gets to
about
be
it
the
on
corruption.
yes, against the outfit, bringing out Richard Kane, which they were also, by bringing the charges against Richard Kane, they were trying to also slander the name of Richard Ogilvie, who you all know is named the train station is named after him. He was running for governor in 68, and his right-hand man for a few years was Richard Kane. Richard Kane was the head of Richard Ogilvie's Special Investigations Unit in the early 60s. And so the Democrats in the Daily Machine were trying to push that message out. Hey, this guy, Richard Kane, used to work for Ogilvie. You want him to be governor? Look at all the crap he did. So yeah, great, really good question. I know that takes a few times to your head to spin about things like that.
Right.
I think that I never, every time that I hear the rendition, it's new to me. There's a new detail because it's so complicated. But it can be boiled down, just as you and TJ just said, to that rather shocking series of core events.
So true. And I think as I was reading the court proceedings, and they're bringing up, Terry Zilligan, and they're bringing the Niles detective who's in charge of the crime on the witness stand. They're bringing the barn bosses to the witness stand. They're bringing all these people up. It's so frustrating because you just want to say, like, hey, where is anybody going to like open a new line of investigation into this? But no, they were like so dead focused on the trial itself. And then there's no follow-up.
Or you would think of an enterprising reporter would have done it or something. Yeah.
Totally. They just kind of let it go. And another really frustrating thing, and Jim, you'll appreciate this, is these were all made, all of these witnesses were brought as offers of proof to impeach the witnesses. And so, but each time the government and the prosecuting government had the opportunity to object to the evidence that the defendants brought. And so, of course, every single time they objected to the jury hearing that evidence. And then the Judge Julius Hoffman, who's famous for the trial of the Chicago 7, I should say infamous, he upheld that objection every single time and never let any of that information impeach the witnesses. So frustrating and tragic, but things that I don't think any of us really knew before. So things that we got to know. I included this page of the court testimony because it has the title of this project within there, and actually the name Intangible Things is actually a quote from Joseph DiArgento, who is believed to be the person that Terry actually tackled at the Golf Mill Sears that day, is Joseph DiArgento. This is a cross-examination of him when he's on the witness stand, and Richard Kane is cross-examining him because he represented himself, another classic Richard Kane thing to do. He asks, what were you promised for your testimony? And DiArgento says intangible things, which, kind of speaks to, this whole concept that, the government wanted everybody to believe that these three were testifying just out of their own volition to try to rehabilitate their own souls and spirits. And they had no personal interest or tangible witness protection deal whatsoever. It was just, we're just doing it to rehabilitate. And he calls it intangible things. And basically, he says it kind of low, obviously, because no one can hear him. And then Richard Kane asks D'Argento what sort of intangible things, and he says courage, faith, hope, many things. And obviously he's lying about that. But what I find so fascinating about that phrase is it's also really kind of indicative of the search for answers now, and we're almost 60 years from the crime. There's the tangible evidence that came with the crime has all been thrown out at this point, and all we have is this circumstantial stuff and these clues and this testimony. And so we are really looking at intangible things as well. So it's kind of like a full circle kind of concept, and kind of why the project is titled that, is right there in the intangible things transcript there.
I have to say, this is such a indictment of the system too. Like what you uncovered wasn't just like a murder; it's all the rest of it. It's like Chicago and its ugliness that was, and still happens today, but so prevalent then. Sad.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's a lot, and so I'll try to be as objective as possible and let you all kind of come to your own conclusions. But I will say I share that conclusion especially. And so I know I said we'd only go an hour, so I mean, unless there's anything else, I think we can start to wrap up. Unless anyone has any other thoughts, I'll wrap it up.
Tom, I was hoping that you could just give me an overview of the crime itself. If it's, I know it's 60 years ago, that there was 3 people involved, and that was D'Argento and LaJoy and Potatoes, or was Pansko one of the 3?
It's a really good question. So 3 robbers in the store with clear plastic face masks that covered up their facial features, and then large trench coats and pistols. And they went to a area on the 2nd floor called the cashier's cage, where every day a Brinks truck driver would come up, pick up money, cash, checks from the accountant up there, and bring them down to the truck and bring it to the bank. They intercepted that kind of arrangement, and one of the they went up to the cashier's cage, held guns up, and said, give the bag, vaulted over the cage, took the money bag, and ran out of the store. But it was a Saturday afternoon, and so there were probably hundreds of people in that department store, given that Sears was like a mecca of the culture there, on a Saturday especially. And so people started to scream, stop that man, get that guy. And Terry heard that. He was working in TV sales at the time, and tackled who was believed to be Joseph D'Argento, had him pinned to the ground in a way that he was basically completely covered him up. The sort of smaller, paunchier robber, who is either Paul Pansko or Michael LaJoy, a very similar build, sort of fatter, chunkier men, was running behind Joseph D'Argento.
Both of them with a limp.
Yes. Kind of was running with a limp, which is reason why they were behind. Held out the gun, pointed it for a while, tried to get pointed at Terry, so did a clear shot and took the shot. And then they all went out of the Sears and into a getaway car, and think that the getaway driver was another guy whose name was Guy Loverboy Mendola. He went by Loverboy, was probably the driver. So there's some theories about that as well. And a lot of the research goes into, okay, what was this crew's MO? Who was usually the driver? Who was usually the holdup guy? Who was usually the guy who would go behind and grab the money bag? That was D'Argento. The driver was usually Mendola. And the person holding the gun was usually LaJoy in these well-documented robberies that occurred before and after. And so where does Paintsco get thrown into it all? It doesn't line up at all with anything he usually did. And so it makes you pause. That was a long answer. One thing that, I'll kind of assign for our book club, and I'm sorry, I'm going to say assign, even though it sounds weird. I'm not your teacher, but is the first chapter of part 1, which goes through the actual crime and all of the details itself, to kind of give you guys a sense of that exact thing.
Did it get anywhere with the Brinks? It sounds like this was an inside job by Brinks and not by Sears. Did they get anywhere with Brinks as far as the mechanic or somebody's involvement with setting up these routes?
Well, it's a good question, because I don't think they ever really found out that piece of information about the mechanic. That's my own finding from reading Paintsco book, and in which he was basically like, yeah, there was all these things going on at the time with this mechanic who was giving out all these jobs. And I think Paintsco probably took a few of those jobs, but there's just no way he took the Gulf Mill job. But there was no follow-up with Brinks. I think the police were very convinced it was like an inside job with, knowing the pickup time of the money and knowing when the Brinks truck driver would get there exactly. It all went totally nowhere. And I think the desperation from the police clearly was born out of having almost no leads, no evidence, or anything to really go off of except their hunch, which was Paintsco.
Well, and didn't you say that even more than a hunch, he represented an open wound, if so to speak? That's probably a really unfortunate metaphor here. They could not lay hands on him. And so they get a twofer here. They solve the crime. They get rid of the guy that they can't put behind bars.
Precisely. And that was exactly the plan. And what John Flood relayed to me was, if Lieutenant Dennis had been successful in assassinating Peanuts Paintsco, it would have been like shooting Billy the Kid or John Dillinger. Peanuts Paintsco was getting bylines in the AP almost every week. There was national fascination with this guy. First of all, he had the cartoon-like look. He had the cartoon-like name. He was just the epitome of Chicago crime, and people were fascinated with him. But he was making Chicago law enforcement a laughingstock by doing that. And so part of the research is kind of understanding his timeline and what he was going through, and from 61 to 64, and even before a little bit, just kind of what trajectory his kind of, I guess, career was on at the time. But the reason that John Flood was convinced that Niles Police was prepared to do this was not his own hunch, but whenever a warrant for murder was issued in the Chicagoland region, every police department locally knew about it in the area. It was sent out on a point-to-point bulletin. Everybody would have had that information so that they could all be on the lookout and kind of as a team effort to find Paul Paintsco, which he drove around in a green Cadillac. He wouldn't have been that hard to find if that information was set out. What actually happened was Lieutenant Dennis secured a murder warrant for Paul Paintsco on very, very thin evidence. One thing, including that he had a Sears card, a Sears credit card, was one of the reasons that they said, oh, he did it. Everybody had a Sears card at the time. But he secured the warrant and he basically put it in his pocket. He didn't send it out on a bulletin. His own front desk secretary did not even know it existed. The reason for that was he was just basically cruising around for months at that point and looking for Paintsco. And he was going to plan to pull him over probably and throw the lights on, have Paintsco get out, shoot him and say, you know, oh, well, he had a gun. I have the warrant in my pocket. He was the killer of Terry Zilligan. Case closed, because he was very slippery. He would have got off charges if that indictment went through, but not even the indictment went through. The grand jury was like, there's not enough evidence to begin with. Why do we even have this warrant in front of us? And it's just to secure the warrant to get the headline.
And again,
And
why
for some reason that never occurred. He never could quite bring that in. And we wouldn't be here talking about this if he had killed him.
Right.
Yeah, again, what was Dennis's motivation for killing Pansco, or attempting to kill Pansco, or wanting to kill Pansco? Why did he want to do it?
Yeah, there was the public pressure to solve the case was still very, very immense. There was also at that time, and it's another thing I'll assign for our next meeting, is there was a Chicago Tribune article that was a huge spread in the Sunday Tribune in June of that year, which is really when all this stuff happened. I mean, there was that's just to show you how much publicity this was having months afterwards. Was the Tribune was putting like their main Sunday article about this crime. They needed to close the case. They had no good leads or evidence, and you know, he was willing to do whatever it took. It also would have garnered him a lot of personal fame as well. And I don't know Ed Dennis. I didn't, you know, never met him. I think he died in 2016, but you know, this has all been relayed to me by John Flood, who knew Dennis, who was very credible and was actually the person who intervened and stopped this plan from taking place, because he knew Paul Paintsco, and he was like, I know he didn't do the Sears job. He would have done it if he had to do it, but he wouldn't have done that job in the first place. It was way too risky in the middle of the mall on a Saturday. This was a professional burglar. He was hardly even a holdup man. He was a burglar. He would sneak into places at night. You know, he was not that kind of brazen person. And so there's just this major divide between kind of the realities and then the police theory.
Can I ask a question or two?
Yeah.
So I think in the podcast, in the pilot episode, you mentioned that Richard Kane got a call from Sam Giancana about the murder. Is that, or did I hear that right?
Correct. Yeah, that's
like the day of the actual killing.
I don't know if it was the day of the killing, but those two were in close contact, and essentially Richard Kane worked for both
Right.
Richard Ogilvie, the sheriff, and the head of the mob, Sam Giancana. He was delivering, you know, the checks to or the cash from the outfit to all the dirty cops. He was the bag man. They were in close contact. They would have been in contact about any major criminal headline, outfit related crime immediately. And so there's a bit of an inference there, but it also comes from, you know, checking with Michael Caine about that, and he confirmed that as well.
Okay. And then was Richard Kane an actual like, if you know, was he an actual inducted member of the Chicago outfit, or was he like a long-term associate? You know, organized crime and like Chicago organized crime is like an interest of mine. So so this is why it's super interesting for me, this whole thing, other than, you know, the fact that Peg's, you know, this is her family and everything. But so do you know if he was an actual like was he Italian and inducted, or was he just like a long time associate
Such a good question. Such a good question. He was a made man in the Chicago outfit. The reason he was a made man in the Chicago outfit is because he wanted that. He wanted that. He went to become a police officer because Sam Giancana basically told him that if you work hard enough and you bend enough things, you can be made in my organization. And at a certain point, they made him made.
Yeah.
And then obviously that took about 10 years for him to undo that, and they eventually assassinated him because he's full of double dealings and totally ambitious and self-serving. But he was a made man, and he actually was Italian. His name, Richard Kane, that's one of his mother's, on his mother's side is Kane. His through his father's side, his name was actually Richard Scalzetti. And
we saw your notes, because I bet you that's going to answer my question.
Yeah. So just to make an example of him, they actually indicted him in that 68 trial under the name Richard Scalzetti to kind of say, hey, look, it's a mob guy, it's an Italian guy. So, maybe a little racism there, but it's like that. Yeah, he's a WAP too,
Right.
we got them all, and I can say that I'm Italian, but
but I also think it's like it's an important. It shouldn't necessarily be like understated that a grand jury would not. It's a big deal for a grand jury to not return an indictment. You know what I mean? Like the batting average for when prosecutors submit a case to the grand jury, it's, if it's not 100, it's 99.9 or 90. And for them to put together an indictment on a press case, and for the grand jury to just say, there's not even enough here to bring this to the next level. I think that's, to me, as an attorney, that jumps out at me like that. It's like,
Right.
Wait a minute, what? They can't secure an indictment, let alone forget the conviction and all that comes after. They can't even get an indictment. That's, I don't know, that's a big, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I have to second that. The thought always was that you could indict a ham sandwich by a grand
Right.
jury. I only saw one case that wasn't a bill wasn't returned from the grand jury, and what happened was you would put a case in front of the grand jury if you wanted the prosecution to end, because the grand jury says no, not going forward. That's it. The case is dead.
Right.
Well, the only time those cases would go in front of a grand jury with insufficient evidence is if you wanted the book closed on the particular suspect that you were looking at.
Right. It was a lot of times to satisfy the family, to say, okay, we'll put forth this indictment, and then when it gets denied, it's the prosecutor can look to the family and say, we're sorry, we tried, but there's not enough here.
That's a good point, and it's like, so what would a warrant with that amount of insufficient evidence, what purpose does that serve? It's literally so they could have it after the fact of killing Painsko. It could be, right? Hey, we had a warrant for a murder. We ended up killing him. Nobody would really look into that, right? They just like, oh, they had a murder warrant. It'd be great press. I'm in politics, so I'm like, oh, I know that would be great press to just say, hey, we had the murder warrant. We had to shoot him down. We were going to arrest him for this. They didn't really care about the indictment. They were planning on ending it right there.
Mm-hmm.
So
do you know by chance the judge who signed the warrant?
Yeah, his name was Herbert Stoffels, and also it wouldn't have been that difficult for Dennis to secure the warrant, given that the circuit court was actually in Niles itself, and so he would have been in that courtroom all the time, knew the judge, so it wouldn't have been difficult at all for him to get it.
Tom, did you ever come across a reference of Painsko in front of the grand jury being brought in on a stretcher?
I know that's a kind of only a story I've heard orally through you,
Yeah.
through
It's
grandma.
part of the family lore. I don't know.
Yeah.
My mother, I think, saw that, but she may have spoken of it as if she saw it.
And that would have been as part of the inquest, which I mean, that's
Yes,
sort of,
actually, it might have been the inquest.
yeah, that's like a kind of a foreign concept to me. This concept of having an inquest for a murder. It did happen, and what the family sort of story has been and has been relayed is that they actually brought Peanuts Painsco in as part of the inquest as
Mhm.
a suspect, and he was on a stretcher because he was saying, "Oh, I'm so injured right now. How could I have done this?"
Mhm.
Which is absolutely his MO. When
Uh-huh.
it comes to like the lawyers he used were always doing that kind of thing, and it
Oh,
worked
yeah.
tremendously, by the way. But I never came across anything. I was hoping that would be in the FOIA and should have been in the Niles Police
Yeah.
FOIA folder, but it just wasn't in there.
Well, and you would say it couldn't have just been a stretcher. There would have had to be maybe x-rays or doctor reports or something along with it.
Yeah, I just find that whole
Yeah,
concept of
weird.
an inquest to be very strange, to bring in a suspect
Yeah.
while you're trying to recreate the crime, and just how that might change the judicial proceedings and appeal. So yeah, but one of those things I wish I found more about.
Yeah. Okay.
Tom, did you pull these transcripts? Did you just order these transcripts from the court reporter's office, or are there these?
It's a good question. I wish. I thought it was going to be that easy, but I had to go to the National Archives and I had to take a picture of every single page. And
In the National Archives, this was, you said?
Yeah, then there's a National Archives on the southwest side of the city that has a copy of these proceedings. And then when I went down to Georgia to visit Michael Caine, he actually had a whole box of these as well. So I got a second stab at it. And so I have all of these in kind of like paper document form. And then part 4 of the manuscript is dedicated completely to the proceedings and has a lot of the direct examinations text within it. Everything relevant is in there.
Awesome.
So that was like a year itself, was just going through the proceedings, the transcript, and pulling out all this information and going through the trial coverage in the local papers, and really digging in. And man, it just gets more and more fascinating as you go. And then I'm sure the lawyers in here are aware of who Julius Hoffman was. He presided over this, and then a year later presided over the Chicago 7, and kind of from there went into obscurity and almost judicial exile eventually. It was so bad. So we're at about an hour and a half here, and I don't want to take any more of your precious time here on this snowy Sunday, even though we're all snowed in anyway. I did want to just suggest kind of an outline of how we may meet again if you're interested in it. I'd love it if I could send you all a few things to read over the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks if you need some more time. Meet again to discuss those, and then try to meet monthly after that, or in sort of longer pieces, but maybe bringing us back together in shorter term is the thinking there, so that we kind of have a second meeting. What I really want to do is send you kind of a 1-page overview of the whole project itself. It's called a Press C. It's a sort of like what you pitch to production companies, etc., to just kind of give you an idea of the project. Chapter 1 of part 1, which is only 8 pages long, it's 10 pages if you read the prologue, but I pretty much described all that verbally to you today. So I saved you 2 pages right there. Chapter 1 of part 1. And then 2 articles. One from 1964, the Chicago Tribune spread that I referenced shortly ago, which is Portrait of a Dead Hero by Ridgely Hunt. That will talk a lot about the crime itself and the aftermath in the family, from Mary to the kids to his Terry's parents, Margaret and Robert. That's a really, really important piece. And then also the 1983 article that is just 1-page column that Art Patak wrote that lovely librarian found for me at Harold Washington Library. Between those 4 things, it really should only take a couple hours to get through and give you a couple weeks, give you a sense of the crime and then a context of the bigger picture. If that all works for you all, of course, all of this is subject to everyone's availability and preference as well. I really appreciate it. Any thoughts?
I'd like that very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Same here.
Yeah.
Is there a good time for everybody to meet on Sundays? Is this time okay? Should we switch it to the night or earlier in the morning? I know a lot of people couldn't come today because of church, which I didn't factor in, but what's a good time?
I would choose day over nighttime.
Okay.
Just throwing that up.
This works for me. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I usually go to mass earlier in the morning, so 11's pretty easy.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Hey, really thank you all so much.
Thomas, thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
getting us together. Very interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
great job,
amount-
Tom.
Honestly,
Love you
the
guys.
amount of time, that's really impressive. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Great to see everyone.
Thank
Love
you,
talking.
guys. Love you all.
Love to everyone. See you in a few weeks.
Sounds good.
Send the
Love you.
readings out now. Send your homework out now. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Love you guys.